does
Sure.
that improves the equal
Sure.
pay?
Sure. John Kennedy signed the Equal Pay Act in 1963. Since that time, and that time he said, you know, this was going to change the way that we deal with women in the workplace, and they were going to be treated equitably when it came to their paychecks. That hasn't been the case, as we have laid out, as I've laid out to you. Over and over again, we are still fighting the same battles, that women are underpaid in every single job that you can name. So what we have tried to do in introducing it in 1997, I'll mention Lilly Ledbetter in a second, because sometimes people get confused. They think that because we did pass the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, that we took care of it. We checked that box and it's done. That is not the case. What the Paycheck Fairness Bill does, it lifts this gag order that doesn't allow employees, men or women, to have a conversation with one another about their pay, their salaries. And that isn't a law, but it is culturally what happens in business. Lilly Ledbetter had to sign a paper when she went to work for Goodyear saying that she would not discuss her salary. And we had a hearing, and we had two folks in the family, husband and wife. I think they both worked in the pharmaceutical industry, and they same jobs. He was paid more than she was paid. She only knew it because when they got the letter talking about increases, etc., she saw his letter and he saw her letter. You know, so she brought suit in that instance. So we take the gag, we lift the gag order. We also allow for the first time the opportunity, if you can prove discrimination. This is not frivolous. Lilly Ledbetter proved discrimination. That then you can deal with filing a class action suit, and you can file for damages. That would be brand new in this instance. But it would be not unlike what we do in civil rights and in other areas where we have the same opportunity for damages. If you can prove the discrimination, and that you have to do. We try to take into consideration small businesses and make some allowances in that effort. The salary has to be in the range of the immediate area, not what somebody would make here and then makes in California. So we have tried to be very, very thoughtful as to how, in fact, we have crafted the legislation. Essentially, that is what. And we also talk about counseling and more assistance with negotiating skills for young women, because they go in and they'll accept anything, you know, and not negotiate for their value or for their work. So what we do is we make the gender discrimination in pay on the same level as we deal with gender discrimination in other areas of our societies, as in civil rights and other places. I will tell you that we now have all 188 members of the Democratic Caucus who are signed on to the legislation. We have one Republican, and it is not Barbara Comstock. So we can't call it a bipartisan piece of legislation. But we won, I told you, when we were in the majority. The problem, the reason why we got to elect LuAnn, we need a majority, and we need people who think in these terms. I introduced the bill in 1997. We're not in the majority in the House. We were out of power until 2006. 2006, George Miller of California gets to head up the Education and Workforce Committee, because you can only hold a chairmanship if you are in the majority. And so I talked to George. George, can we bring the bill up? He said, yes, get your co-sponsors. I go out and I get 224. At that time, we had the majority. So I went and got 218 to pass the bill. So I got 224 Democrats to sign on. I will also tell you, with the issue of damages, both George and Leader Pelosi at that time, they cornered me on the floor. It was a Friday night, and they said, you know, what about the damages issue? Are we going to be able to do that? They said, we don't know that it can pass. And so I said, look, give me the weekend. Just give me the weekend. I called every single Democratic member of our caucus, and I asked about that. It was not about damages, but the concern was about small business and what would happen to small business. A reasonable concern. And you're in business, you get it, you know this. So we made adjustments according to that. Anyway, the bill was marked up, the bill passed in committee, brought to the floor of the House, and we won. And at that first vote, we had 14 Republicans who voted with us. The second time, again, we won, and that time we had 10 Republicans who voted with us. Both times, as I said, we lost in the Senate. Now, what Lilly Ledbetter did, let me just take a second on this because I think there was some confusion about the Fair Pay Act. Lilly, and when Barbara Comstock talks about Lilly Ledbetter, she doesn't know Lilly Ledbetter. You have no idea what a remarkable woman Lilly is. She worked for over 20 years at Goodyear. And she only by virtue of an anonymous tip as she was retiring, did she find out that she was being paid less than the men on either side of her who held the same job. She had a decision to make as to whether or not she would take on a lawsuit against Goodyear. She went to her husband and she said, we could lose everything. We're not talking about some CEO of a corporation. Her husband said, you have to do it. And she did. She proved discrimination. She won in court. Goodyear then took, and it was a $3 million award. Goodyear took this to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court changed what had been the common interpretation of the law about how long after you know about the discrimination you could file suit. They said it would have been right from her last paycheck, so she would have been able to file suit. They said no, she had to have filed suit at the beginning of the process, 20 years past, when she did not even know she was being discriminated against. So that's what the court decided. She got 0 in terms of any compensation. Subsequent to that, I think it was Ruth Bader Ginsburg who said, this is now in the purview of the legislature. And in the House, we corrected that, and we won that vote in both the House and the Senate, which essentially got us back only to where we were. It didn't move us forward. And Lilly, if she was standing here, she would say that, because she's all over the country talking about this and talking about paycheck fairness. So when people say, well, we did this, no, we didn't do it. We haven't moved the ball in terms of paycheck fairness. Yes?